Hey y'all, I'm Rachel Altman and welcome to UnALTered Truth. Now today is Friday the 13th, not exactly the luckiest day, and high-profile Democrats might be among the people who don't feel so lucky this week. Even though the Democratic Party declared victory in the White House and kept the House of Representatives, many liberals seem to hope for and even expect a true blue wave, where the country forcefully repudiated Trump and the whole direction of the Republican Party under his leadership. People were even predicting blue Texas, but of course that blue wave hasn't really materialized. The presidential race was no landslide, and Democrats actually lost seats in the House. So the party is doing some reflection and trying to figure out what happened. In many ways, this country isn't the one that the Democratic Party hopes it is, and that's given rise to some drama. From internal struggles between factions of the party to AOC's list making to rejected calls for unity, a lot has gone on in the last week or two. So let's talk about it. One of the big items of the week has been the clash between the moderate and more left-wing members of the Democratic Party. A lot of it started with Representative Abigail Spanberger, a moderate Democrat in Virginia who narrowly won her race in a swing district over Nick Freitas, a libertarian-leaning Republican who is actually one of my favorite GOP candidates this election cycle. Spanberger got on a call a couple of days after the election and essentially blamed the Democrats' losses on ideas like defunding the police and leaning into socialism. Based on her observation that a lot of attack ads accuse Democrats of wanting to do those things, she felt pretty strongly that socialism and defunding the police were scaring off persuadable voters. Yesterday, Senator Joe Manchin seemed to agree, memorably tweeting, "Defund the police, defund my butt." AOC, who we all know and love, pushed back against Spanberger's message last week and tweeted a long thread about the reasons why she thought that some Democrats lost their races, which included things like bad digital strategy and not knocking enough doors. AOC isn't really denying that the right will keep attacking Democrats for being cop-hating socialists, because they will. She's more so saying that Democrats should invest more in countering those narratives and defending their ideas to the voters, rather than backing away from more radical positions. And honestly, she has a point. Both of them do. To Spanberger and Manchin's credit, socialism and defunding the police should not be the national face of the party. It's very responsible for Democrats in moderate and conservative districts to separate themselves from those things as much as they can, because they do not poll well overall, especially among persuadable voters who might be also considering voting for a Republican. But that doesn't mean the party can't allow for viewpoint diversity. It doesn't mean it can't be a big tent. Our members of Congress are supposed to represent their districts and states, and some districts really are left-wing. In fact, to AOC's point, if you poll Americans on actual policy proposals rather than more abstract ideas like socialism, you'll find that Americans are often a lot more progressive than you'd think. And believe me, I find no joy in telling you that. If you're a politician and your constituents are demanding, based on their own experiences, that we scale back the role police play in our society, for example, you shouldn't just ignore them because somebody in the DNC says defunding the police scares people in Iowa. I mean, frankly, no party representing millions of people can be a monolith. You need local and regional diversity because people have different needs. The Democratic Party can have a national platform and overarching ideals, like the principle that a strong federal government is an important tool for improving people's lives and solving problems, and that those interventions are worth it. But trying to shut down all communications and policy debates within the party won't actually kill its factions. It'll only make them more stubborn and passionate. I want to point out that Republicans can learn a lesson from this too. The GOP has very much become the party of Trump, and I remember back in the 2018 midterms when that was still taking shape. When a few Republicans who were critical of Trump lost their elections, Trump called them out and mocked them publicly by name. The suggestion seemed to be that if only they were more ardent Trump supporters, they would have won. But we also saw Republicans who strongly defended Trump lose moderate districts to Democrats, which shouldn't have been all that surprising. Viewpoint diversity based on the district and its needs is key. If the Republican Party is going to have a future post-Trump, it needs to do better at expanding into new constituencies, like it did with Hispanic Americans this election cycle. When it comes down to it, I really think homogeneity is the death of progress. And that brings me back to AOC's list-making proposal. She's very newsworthy this week, isn't she? She tweeted out a message asking if anyone was archiving the online presence of Trump sycophants in case they'd deny their complicity in the future. And then the Trump Accountability Project was introduced. We don't know exactly who was behind it or what the whole story was, but essentially this project would have tried to take down names of people who worked for Trump, donated to him, supported him, whatever, and blacklist them, I guess. The point was supposedly so we don't forget who they are, but at least in my opinion, you've got to assume that they're going for something, a little more actionable than that. Luckily, this project shut down almost as soon as it cropped up. Here's my take. Obviously, taking down lists of political infidels is not great for our civic culture. It's unhealthy and it reduces people's identity to one choice: to vote for someone, to take a job somewhere, rather than the many things you might share and be able to work on together. And as someone who's from DC, I can tell you that it's objectively ridiculous to assume that someone supports the current president just because they work in the White House. But the thing about blacklists and boycotts is that they only work if enough people actually care. They only work if enough people are that committed to division, and I'm sure there are plenty of people who would love for Chris Pratt, for example, to be blacklisted from Hollywood because he seems to lean right, but more people like Chris Pratt, so he still gets cast. Some conservatives wanted to cancel Nike for uplifting Colin Kaepernick, but guess what? Nike's still doing great because people like what they're putting out. And I have enough faith in Americans to believe that making political lists just wouldn't work. It wouldn't have a great effect. There are exceptions, but I think as much as we love our political parties, we love our fellow human beings more. As a libertarian, I think a lot of what the state does is terribly wrong, but that doesn't stop me from caring for my family and friends who defend those government interventions. All we can do is surround ourselves with people who have love in their hearts and whose intentions are in the right place. It doesn't matter what their party is. That's what I think real unity is about. A lot of Republicans have been taken aback by Joe Biden's call for our country to unite. They see it as sort of a Trojan horse meant to get Republicans to sign on to hardcore liberal ideas and stop resisting. And I can understand why some people view it that way. Our country is so polarized that Democrats in Congress didn't exactly do a lot of uniting with the Republican Party during the last 4 years. In several cases, they've seemed to shoot down policy proposals just because Republicans were the ones who brought them up. But if both sides continue escalating and continue being this polarized, where will we be after 4 more years of this? Unity doesn't mean Republicans should give up and abandon their principles. That's not how principles work. If Republicans started voting yes on the Green New Deal in full come January, that's not unity, that's capitulation. But unity does mean voting for principle over party. Politicians in both parties need to stop putting their own clout in dinner party invitations over their constituents when somebody from the other party introduces legislation that would actually make a positive change. And above all, unity is for all of us, the American people, not the elite political class. Members of both parties have divided us and encouraged us to look at our neighbors in bad faith and assume the worst. Unity is the opposite. Unity is looking past our differences and looking for our shared humanity. It drives us to start solving problems in our communities before the politicians even get to lay their hands on them. I don't know what Joe Biden means when he calls for unity. But when I think about unity, I think of a Leviticus verse we can all take to heart. Love your neighbor as yourself. I'll see you next week.